Hi. So I just got back from a trip to Washington, D.C., where I was part of a group of about a dozen or so women united in a common purpose to lobby national representatives and senators to support women's sex-based rights and LGB rights. The effort was largely spearheaded by WoLF, that is, the Women's Liberation Front, and it also included representatives from Pennsylvania for Women, Roar New York, and LGB Alliance USA. I came as a representative for LGB Alliance USA. So the way it worked is that Wolf gave a call out to their supporters to encourage them to schedule a meeting with their representatives and senators. And that way, once a meeting was scheduled, we could stop by their office and talk to either the senator or the representative or their aides. Usually you get an audience with the aides rather than the politicians themselves. So we had quite a few meetings booked. However, several days before we came, some LGBTQ activist, I think maybe it was a reporter for The Hill, noticed Wolf's fundraiser for this endeavor and started complaining about us and pressured politicians into canceling their meetings with us. And lo and behold, a number of Democrats did cancel their meetings with us. These include Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, Senator Adam Schiff from California, Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois, Representative Sidney Kamlager from California, Representative Raskin from Maryland, and Representative Deborah Ross from North Carolina. So what did we do about that? Well, we got a whole bunch of rubber chickens. And we stood in front of the office of some of those politicians who canceled on us with our rubber chickens. Why? We are sending a message that they are chicken for not wanting to speak to a group of feminists and lesbians because they are too worried about activist pressure. Okay, that said, there were also quite a few Democratic Congress people who did not cancel on us. And so we went to speak to them and or their aides. We visited the offices of the following Democratic reps: DeSaulnier from California, DeLuzio from Pennsylvania, Klein from Virginia, Carabajal from California, Garamendi from California, and Carson from Indiana. We also met with the offices of Democratic Senators Warnock from Georgia, Ossoff from Georgia, Kelly from Arizona, Van Hollen from Maryland, also Brooks from Maryland, Gillibrand from New York, and Fetterman from Pennsylvania, though that one was a bit complicated, as I'll get to later. We also met with Republicans. The Republican representative offices we met with include Adrienne Smith from Nebraska, Nancy Mace from South Carolina. We were originally going to meet with Nancy Mace herself, which would have been really cool because she's such a strong opponent of gender ideology, but she was too busy with the budget bill, so she couldn't make it and had to send an aide instead. And the Republican senators whose offices we met include Budd from North Carolina, Grassley from Iowa, Ricketts from Nebraska, Young from Indiana, and Marshall from Kansas. Now, I have to give a disclaimer that I was not present for all of these meetings. We had so many meetings with overlapping times, our group had to divide and conquer, so to speak. But I'll try to give the best summary I can based on my recollections of what I heard from others, as well as what I remember from meetings I was present at. First of all, let me try to summarize our strategy. For the Democrats, we really led with lesbians and the whole lesbian angle. That is how lesbians have been impacted by the whole gender ideology craze, how we've lost our spaces, how so many young lesbians transition due to homophobia, and how many lesbians are voting for the first time for Republicans because they are so let down by Democrats on this issue. We also brought up points about how pornography has influenced girls to identify as non-binary. And particularly the WoLF representatives in the group emphasized how they agree with Democrats on reproductive rights issues, so we tried to find common ground. And of course, too, as LGB Alliance, I also brought up how we very strongly support marriage equality and appreciate Democrats' support for marriage equality. And what we found is a range of responses. So some of the Democrats, the Democratic aides, came across as maybe not entirely interested or shocked and didn't take any notes. And that's what I remember from Senator Van Hollen's aide, for example. She just seemed so shocked from what we were saying in the whole interview. She just wasn't doing anything. But others came across as surprisingly engaged and curious. For example, Gillibrand's aide, or the aide for Representative Carson from Indiana. I wasn't there, but apparently the meeting with Senator Brooks also went well. A number of Democrats were surprised when we brought up the role that homophobia played in transition, and they admitted that they had not heard the lesbian angle on this issue before. Our last meeting with Senator Kelly's aides was quite challenging in that there were two females we met with, and one of them went by them pronouns. But honestly, we got through that well, and while the non-binary aide tried to prod us with a few kind of softball questions that she kind of walked back, the other aide was very receptive. Most of the aides we met focused on women's issues, but I do remember also meeting with one aide that is for Representative Carvajal, who specialized in LGBTQ issues. He claimed the reason Democrats opposed the Protect Women's in Sports Act was because they didn't like how the sex testing would be enforced, but was willing to work with us to come up with a better crafted bill, and pointed out how even California Governor Newsom was interested in compromise on that issue. So that response was more encouraging than I expected for an LGBTQ plus 8. Carabajo himself actually briefly met with us and mostly just said how he appreciated our feedback, but how he really emphasizes inclusion, blah, blah. So, I don't know. There was only one meeting that went genuinely badly, and that was the meeting with Senator Fetterman's office. Now, this was not a meeting I was present for, except for maybe the last few minutes. So the meeting had an awkward start because while Fetterman claimed in an interview that he canceled his staff's meeting with us, in fact, his office never sent us an email saying he canceled. So we weren't sure what to do. A group of us, spearheaded by women from Pennsylvania, ended up going to his office and waiting around about 45 minutes for an audience. And finally, they got a meeting with Fetterman's chief counsel, Jason Smith, who basically spent the entire meeting trying to blow us off. He was dismissive. He claimed he didn't know what a single-sex space was. He refused to believe that there were males being transferred to women's prison. He was rude to one of our group members who was a sexual assault survivor, stuff like that. Like I said, I was only there in the last few minutes, but even in those last few minutes, I could tell this guy was a total jerk. And probably a misogynist, too. By the way, Fetterman's office had a progress flag in front of it. So while a lot of people had high hopes for Fetterman, since he kind of had a reputation for being a maverick who doesn't obey the progressive sort of tagline the whole time, I think it's safe to say that those hopes have been dashed. As for the Republicans we visited, the good news is that there was no hostility. They listened. I think the male Republican aides came across as less interested in the topic than the female aides, and this was also something we noticed on the Democratic side. But I'd say the female Republican aides in particular were definitely quite receptive. The aide we spoke to for Senator Grassley, Abigail, was amazing. She already knew who WoLF was, and she wrote a dissertation about porn culture. At one point, the conversation turned to surrogacy, and she talked about how sometimes people are accused of homophobia when they criticize surrogacy. I made the point that the problem is that sometimes when people oppose surrogacy, they do so selectively. They oppose it for gay couples, but then give a pass for infertile married heterosexual couples. So my suggestion was that if you're going to oppose surrogacy, make sure that you do so consistently and don't try to pick on gay couples. And Abigail appreciated that suggestion. She also lit up in agreement when I brought up the HHS report's discussion of the homophobia to transition pathway. So she definitely got it. Good for her. We also had a meeting with Senator Ricketts from Nebraska. I brought up the HHS report, and he said he hadn't heard of it. In fact, it sounds like most, if not all of the people were not familiar with the HHS report amongst the people we talked to, both Republicans and Democrats alike. And this only encouraged me to push it even more and more in our meetings. It was one of the points I brought up most frequently because I think it's really crucial that everyone should know about that report. I also randomly introduced myself as a member of LGBA Alliance USA to Senator Ted Cruz, who just so happened to be doing a press conference in one of the Senate office buildings. He gave the plug to J.K. Rowling and Martina Navratilova, so we knew he's following them at least. When Sharon from WoLF joked to him about how he probably doesn't typically meet so many lesbians at once, he responded, "You'd be surprised." I thought that was funny. So overall, I'm really glad I went to this. WoLF hopes to do this again next year, hopefully with more people. That would take people like you reaching out to your congresspeople to grab a meeting and or even volunteering to come out to DC to lobby. Keep your eyes peeled about when we might do this again. Now, I want to emphasize LGBA Alliance USA is a nonpartisan organization, so we cannot endorse parties or candidates or unendorsed parties or candidates. So everything I just said, just keep that as information for future reference when you're making your own decision about how to vote. Nothing that I said should be interpreted as an endorsement or unendorsement of any of the people I mentioned. It's just purely for your own informational purpose. So with that, I could go on and on and on for longer, but I think I'll stop here. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Women's Liberation Front, ROAR, WDI USA, LGB Alliance, and PA4Sex-Based Rights are in the Capitol today. One of the meetings that we had after a day of wonderful meetings with a lot of Democrats and Republicans where we found common ground with everyone. Last meeting of the day was Senator Fetterman. And we were met with fear, loathing, disdain,
and laughter. He literally laughed us out of his office.
Yes. Hostility, which is all based on what?
Fear.
So,
Progressive misogyny.
yes. Which is all based on what?
Fear.
So, Senator Fetterman, the women came to Washington to meet with you. The feminists, the lesbians, we came to meet with you. And we got met with fear. So here's a chicken for you, sir.